Welcome back to the University of Sikistan, and this week we're doing periodization of plyometrics. Is there an optimal overload principle? So this paper was quite interesting, and we were arguing about the results for this for about maybe 10 to 15 minutes. So it is a great paper except for one fatal flaw, which we'll get to. So this paper is coming at us from, where's this coming from? Belgium. Oh, very interesting. Never had a paper from Belgium before. Have you been to Belgium?
I think we drove through Belgium.
If anyone's from Belgium in the comments, feel free to say hello from Belgium.
Arnold's from Belgium.
Oh, Arnold is from Belgium. Great little weightlifter Arnold is. I've got my notepad. Hang on there a second.
God.
So basically, this week's paper was looking at can you periodize plyometrics. It's not something you've seen before. The title kind of got us. What they tested for got us. The number of athletes they had was quite interesting. And so it would have been very interesting to see some results. But as I said again, they had one fatal flaw which really fucked up the results. So they basically wanted to see could you periodize plyometric training and then test it via a variety of different factors and see could you get meaningful results across different groups under different training parameters. So what we had was we had an 8-week training intervention, which is a great time for plyometrics. 8 weeks is, I feel, is like quite adequate. 2 sessions a week, which again is pretty much all you'd need for plyometric training. They had 44 males. 2 of them dropped out. They were either soccer players, basketball players, or volleyball players, likely all from the university area. So they were between like 20 and 27. They were split into 4 different groups of 11, and they had let me just get this right now because this is important, but the results actually don't even matter. So is it even important? So what we had was...
Boom.
Sorry, my notes, just to make this clear now for everyone. Just to make this clear for everyone, right?
We're working on a hybrid digital and paper note system, are we?
We are, yeah, and the paper notes is wrong.
Very interesting.
And so we had those 4 in the group. Then we had them split into 4 different groups. The first group increased training volume with exercise of mixed intensity. This group is called mixed or mix. The second group kept training volume equal and increased exercise intensity. The third group increased training volume and kept exercise intensity low. And then obviously we had a control group which did their normal activities. Now everyone went about their normal activities outside of the training sessions, which we'll get to in a minute. What we had was 8 weeks, 2 sessions, and we will just give you a quick run over of the movements they were doing. They defined volume by the contacts players made at the ground, basically just repetitions, which probably an easier way of counting for them. And then the intensity was determined by which type of plyometric exercise they were doing, but they also measured that using ground reactive forces from a force plate, which every university in the world has. And if any master's S&C student is doing a research for their master's, they'll always use that for some reason because it's a nice little gimmick. But it's very useful if you're doing good research.
Great. It's a great tool.
Great tool. Phenomenal tool for what it does. Ground reactive force is very, very important for plyometric training. So the low intensity movements were considered skipping, double leg hops, running jumps, and jumping lunges. And then the high intensity plyometric movements were considered depth jumps from 50 centimeters, so half a meter, which is reasonable. That's pretty.
That's getting up there.
That's getting up there for depth jumps if you're doing them correctly and you're not well acquainted with them. Then we had consecutive counter movement jumps, standing broad jumps, and then depth jumps. So split into the groups, did the volume and intensity according to the group they're in and the exercises they were given. And then once they were finished the program, they were tested. They had some blood values taken. So CK, Calvin Klein, or creatine kinase, we don't know which, was taken. Then there was lactate dehydrogenase. These were just testing some principles, which was an interesting little add-on to the testing.
I actually don't.
Yeah.
I don't like those add-ons.
I don't know. I don't know why they did.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just adding to the paper.
You just know that they're in a meeting.
Yeah.
Talking about this paper, and they're like,
yeah,
we should get some blood values.
Yeah. Get this paper out there, make it seem sciencey.
The biochem guy in the corner is like, yeah, let's get these blood values as well.
Yeah, always in the
Everyone's
corner.
like, oh my god.
Those biochem lads are always in the corner.
Yeah.
So
they fucking blog.
So the movements they tested were 5 meter sprints, 10 meter sprints, 5x10 shuttle runs, squat jumps, counter movement jumps with and without arm swing, which I like that they did, standing broad jump. So they ran this. Fitz, do you want to give us like a quick synopsis of the results before we just
scroll down there a tiny bit? Something piqued my interest. No, a bit more. So as we said, this paper had loads of potential, right? It's interesting. They're looking at things we're interested in. Obviously, we program plyometrics quite frequently. We're going to have a plyometric program at some point that we want the vast majority of people to be able to do. These are important questions to be asking. They use quite good metrics. Their way of looking at the metrics made sense to us. But then we look at the results, and you've no impact effect for 5 meter sprint, 10 meter sprint, 5 by 10 meter sprint, squat jump. There was then a training effect was observed over the course of the entire intervention, but there was also a training effect for the control group who weren't doing the control. So mixed volume, high low volume, and low volume and control all got better at certain ones of these values, like the squat jump and the 5 by 10. So nothing was really coming out in the results, right? And you get these kind of like apparent increases. You get standing broad jumps, the mixed volume, the low high volume, and the low volume were significantly different from control, but there's not really, it's just for standing broad jump, so then do you have some sort of weird outliers within that control group that standing broad jumps are in some way difficult from them? And that's the issue with this results, is where the debate kind of started between the two of us, is why do you get these non-conclusive results? You fairly rigorous study design, bar one key fact. You have a great group of athletes, like a big enough group, and they're all fairly experienced. You have a nice length of study, so you have 8 weeks, which is definitely enough for a plyometric training program. You have quite good testing measures, and they're looking at the right things. So why are we not getting good values? Why do you think we're not getting good values, Gareth?
So the key factor here is what we saw. We saw like control groups, if you look at the results, getting better at some exercises, which doesn't make any sense. So what we typically expect to see in this group, so of our groups, what we'd expect to see get better would be people, so we'd expected the group that kept training volume equal and increased intensity, we probably would have expected them to get better than the other groups. And we would also probably have expected the group which kept training volume equal and increased exercise intensity, and then increasing training.
So just the mixed group,
the mixed
expect
group.
all of them to get some way better.
Well, and we would have probably expected the increasing training volume group to maybe not get better than the others or get slightly worse. Now, why would you expect this to be? So the most important thing we're always talking about with speed training here, and it's really heavily backed up by the research and other people who are experts in this field, and there is established physiological and biochemical reasons why this is that if you train a movement slow, you do not have any super compensation like you would for high force movements like muscle building or high force like deadlifts or something like that. It does not happen, and it's a huge misconception a lot of coaches have with some of this stuff. If you want to train a movement fast, you have to do it at the speed you want it to do. It's why weighted punches don't work. It's why heavy weighted bats don't work for baseball. It's why weighted rackets don't work for tennis or racquetball. You have to train fast to encourage that high speed stuff to happen. If you train slow, different motor units are used, different muscle fibers are used, different muscle fiber changes are incurred after the training sessions. If you train slow, you only encourage slow movement, and it is very definitive. It's very interesting that happens. It's so well established that it happens, it's almost unarguable. So that's why when we looked at this, we would have said, oh, look, these particular groups, what we typically see with plyometric training is if you increase volume, no matter how talented you are, no matter how much drugs you're on, at a certain point, if you increase volume, you just start doing slow because you get fatigued. Low threshold motor units are typically slow twitch fibers, so type 1 fibers, they start getting used. We start training slow movement, we start getting unfavorable adaptations for what we're looking at. So no matter how good an athlete are and how much drugs, if you start increasing volume, so we'd expect the increased volume group to get shitter or not get better at their testing. Most likely at the minimum not get better. And so we were arguing about this for like 10 or 15 minutes. And we're like, what the fuck? And I was giving out about p-values again, and I'm saying it's not really useful for this kind of training.
We actually had a long chat about p-values.
But the problem is that Fitzy was on the ball with this one. He said, I bet they were still doing their other sports. And so what we had was soccer players, basketball players, and volleyball players, all very high plyometric based or high velocity movements. Like soccer's have huge change direction, volleyball players have loads of plyometric jumping in their training, basketballs have both of those, they have a lot of jumping and change of direction, so high forces, and they're all encouraged to maintained their regular activity during the study. 2 even dropped out because of injury or illness. So they were continuing their normal training volume, and we know, like we just described, for those reasons, that is detrimental to plyometric training.
Yeah. So like if we look at what we would have expected, right? If you've given us this title and these constraints, what we would expect, as Gerf was saying, that low intensity going to high intensity with moderate or normal values for volume.
Yeah.
That's what we would expect to be like winner, big W, number one.
Oh, okay.
Then we'd probably have like the volume staying the same and you getting mixed intensities. We'd probably expect that to be number two.
That might have been interesting.
That's an interesting study. That's a very interesting study.
Yeah.
The issue here is volleyball, incredibly differing levels of intensity depending on whether you're competing, whether you're training, what phase of training you're in, what phase of competition you're in. Are you later on in the season? Do you very frequently have matches? Same for basketball, same for soccer. Are you competing once a week? Are you training 4 times or 5 times a week? You're basically looking at altering a drastic thing in someone's training, right? So altering their plyometrics training, but that only being around 20% of total training volume. So depending on what level these guys or girls are training at, they're at least doing 2 or 3 sport-specific sessions a week, and then probably 1 competitive session after that. So 2 or 3 evenings a week, they're on the soccer pitch, the basketball court, or the volleyball court, and then they're doing some sort of game or match or whatever, probably at the weekends. Then you expect 2 sessions of plyometrics, and I think the sessions were like 45 minutes long. 2 45-minute sessions, which is a total of 90 minutes per week. When you take each of those team training sessions is probably 90 minutes to 2 hours. That's 90 minutes by 3 is 270 minutes, and then a game on top of that could be probably another 2 hours. You're talking about overall around 20% of your total time training is the thing you're manipulating. And then not only are you only manipulating the plyometrics during that 20%, but in almost all other factions of their training, they have plyometrics and speed work and agility work. This would be very different if it was a load of powerlifters or a load of swimmers or a load of darts players, right? And they don't do plyometrics in their training. They don't have speed or agility work in their training. There's no real carryover in terms of direct carryover, right? Obviously, strength work would carry over. Having better capacity would carry over because you'd be able to have better quality as you go through the higher volume sessions. But in that case, with this study design, you probably would have seen some sort of different values. Like you would have seen some sort of outcome from it instead of seeing virtually no outcome. Like the notable thing for this paper is at the end of the paper in their practical applications, where usually you get like the little nugget, you know, the bit that most coaches need to read. Mm-hmm. It basically says, okay, study results showed that when training load, so volume by intensity by frequency, is matched, different progression models of plyometric training, so that's increasing volume, the intensity, or both, provide similar chronic performance benefits in recreational team sports athletes. So it basically means, lads, if you want to go get better at plyometrics, doesn't matter what you do. You actually don't even need to do anything. You can just be in a rest in a control group and you'll get better at it, which obviously is incredibly unhelpful. And these are big, expensive, heavy, weighty studies to do, you know. Mm-hmm. Yeah, every university in Europe isn't pumping out a study like this every year. Most universities in Europe aren't pumping out studies like this every year. Studies that have big cohorts, long intervention periods, with actual important, valuable results for coaches. Mm-hmm. And it's just disappointing in this case that we can't use anything from it.
So probably the issue here was the fact that it's just really hard to get athletes to stop doing stuff because athletes are difficult sometimes. I'm joking. I'm not joking. Sometimes, you know, with sports like this, depending on what time of year they did this study, it could have been an off season, it could have been an in season, it could have been club season's finished and university season had started, most likely when that was. So it's very hard to get athletes just to stop doing stuff for 2 months for a study like this. For them, there's no real incentive for them to stop playing their sports, and it doesn't make sense if they're collegiate level athletes, if they're semi-pro athletes, if they're hoping to go pro athletes. There's no real reason for them to be like, okay, I'm going to do this study. Now, in this case, maybe you could have made an argument that it would have benefited their training if they thought about it, because it is a good program, solid movements. There's nothing, everything bar the fact that the athletes had to kept training was the main issue with this. So their main issue was probably getting a certain number of athletes above the power value that let them do the study correctly, that would stop doing their thing. And it's nearly impossible to get a study like that. That you want athletes who've already done some plyometric training, because if you got athletes who'd never done plyometric training, like if we did get 40 powerlifters, for example, it's unlikely they would have done a lot of plyometric training. So we wouldn't really get in. It'd be put in question the meaning of the results if they'd done a lot of plyometric training already, or have done no plyometric training already. Because there's obviously going to be some beginner gains there, and new once you become acquainted with the exercises, you get benefits and stuff. So that would have been too hard to quantify. So the athletes they used were perfect. It's the fact that the athletes were doing other stuff outside the thing was almost certainly what's skewed these results, because these results just don't make sense. They don't line up with the weight of evidence that high speed training is going, and it has been very, very well established now for quite a while that that's what's needed in speed training, velocity training, plyometric stuff. So unfortunately, just one fatal flaw. I don't really blame the researchers. You wouldn't have been able to get athletes to stop doing stuff like that. Maybe if you did it a different time of year, maybe if you did it the winter time, maybe, but I assume basketball still plays. There still be soccer leagues and stuff, so it's very hard to get that to happen. It's a shame, because I would have loved to seen what the results for this would have been. It probably would have been, like we said, the group that kept their volume the same and then increased intensity. Would you have been able to actually periodize plyometric stuff? Would be very interesting to see. That would have been very, very interesting to see. It would also have been interesting to see if the mixed group, so a mix of low intensity stuff and high intensity stuff, was that important. That would have been so cool to see, the two of those. But unfortunately,
But you fucked it, lads.
Fucked it. So if anyone's there doing your masters, lads, and you're looking for something to do the same study. Get same number of athletes, but don't let them do anything else, and then we'll see. Because I'd love to see the results of a study like this, because it'd be very, very interesting. This is one of those studies where you're like, that's just straight up useful. Yeah. If you got good results, but we know these results these are not correct results. They're not right. That doesn't make sense with the plethora of other results. So unfortunately.
Just the very last thing as well, we've jumping programs, like 20 of them that are in different stages. If jumping is actually something that you guys are wanting, like, do you want a bigger vertical jump, do you want a bigger broad jump or whatever, if that is something that's valuable to me, just let us know down below, because we literally have no idea, and we kind of don't prioritize that program as to getting it up and getting it online.
Seek a jump.
Seek a hops.
You seek a hops. That's probably better.
Purely due to the fact that we just we're very involved with the strength work. We're just not sure if you guys are into it. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you all again soon.
Yeah, let us know if you want a jump program.